Nestled in a quiet corner of an old cobblestone street stood a quaint bookstore cafe. Its modest windows revealed shelves upon shelves of well-worn volumes that tugged at the hearts of passers-by, while aromatic coffee beans perfumed the brisk air each time the door swung open. The owner, a gentle soul named Clara, had inherited the shop from her grandmother years ago. She'd spent her childhood weekends racing among the towering shelves, losing herself in faraway realms of fantasy and verse. In adulthood, she added the cafe section to fulfill a dream, to pair the intoxicating aroma of freshly brewed coffee with the melody of poetry that danced through her mind constantly. The two arts mixed in her establishment, turning it into a refuge for hopeless romantics, students seeking inspiration, and travelers looking for a kind place to rest. The warmth of the gumwood floors and the slight creak of the steps leading to the second-story reading nook lent the shop an air of timelessness. Threadbare rugs lay scattered across the floor, exuding stories of their own. Old lamps cast a golden glow, and the overhead lights were carefully dimmed, so that hand-scribbled poems, bound kids' picture books, and thick anthologies could be read in relative peace. On the menu, Clara had carefully curated coffee brews that each carried a story. Beans from distant lands, ethically sourced and roasted in small batches to ensure notes of chocolate, citrus, or warm spices sprang to life in each steaming cup. Regulars praised not only the cappuccinos and chai lattes, but also her mother's recipe for cinnamon buns, which Clara served warm on porcelain plates adorned with swirls of faded flowers. One early autumn evening, the days growing short and the shadows lengthening fast, Clara's attention drifted away from her beloved espresso machine toward the front door as the bell chimed. A figure loomed on the threshold. A tall man in a worn coat, dusted with the hints of a recent journey. He held a scuffed leather satchel close, a slim notebook peeking out from within. The man's face bore the gentle lines of both laughter and worry, and his eyes carried a spark that gleamed like hidden jewels. He approached the counter, politely asked for a cup of strong black coffee, and set down a folded travel map that had obviously seen better days. Clara, intrigued by his quiet manner, welcomed him with a small smile and set about preparing his drink with care. "Thank you," he said, voice low and somewhat hesitant. "I've been on the road most of today. It's nice to stumble into a cozy place like this." Clara's curiosity had been piqued. "Passing through? We don't get many visitors this time of year." He nodded, eyes drifting around the shop as though memorizing each detail. "I'm a poet, and I roam from town to town, reading at small gatherings, libraries, open mics, wherever the wind carries me. My name is Gabriel." He extended his hand, palm calloused by the friction of constant travel. Clara shook it gently, sensing the unspoken stories etched into his skin. "Clara," she introduced herself. She took note of the faint ink stains on his wrist, as though at some point he had scribbled wildly in a burst of creative fervor. Those very stains made her heart flutter with recognition. He was an artist in transit, not unlike her grandmother, who had once carried a small pocketbook of poems wherever she went. Later that evening, after most of the day's visitors had wandered off into the hush of the night, Clara dimmed the lights at the front window and motioned for Gabriel to take a seat by the small corner stage, an informal platform where, on special occasions, poetry nights were hosted. Outside, a drizzle had begun, turning the world into a watercolor of wet reflections and street lamp halos. A few candles flickered on wooden tables, their flames dancing in the faint draft. Gabriel sipped the last of his coffee, the steam rolling in delicate spirals. "It's truly enchanting here," he said quietly. "I've rarely found a place that speaks so directly to my love of words and the aroma of roasted beans." Clara set a fresh brew in front of him, one she thought might inspire new lines of verse. An Ethiopian roast with fruity undertones. "I've always believed that coffee and poetry are kindred in a way," she confided. "They both invigorate the senses and broaden our perspective, helping us feel more deeply. He took a tentative sip, letting the flavors roam across his palate. She saw a quiet spark of joy in his eyes. Delicately, Gabriel slid his notebook onto the table. Under candlelight, she glimpsed lines, scrawled in pen-hearted images, half-finished stanza breaks, a sprinkling of word sketches detailed in the margin. Together they lingered in the moment, the hush of the night weaving around them, as if guarding their communion in the realm of the spoken and unspoken word. Eventually, Gabriel half laughed and asked, "So, do you write your own poems too? Or just serve them in the shape of cappuccinos?" With a shy laugh, Clara admitted, "I've written a few lines in my day, but they hardly compare to the ones that pass through here. I have a little black journal hidden behind the counter where no one can find it." She gestured discreetly, and he couldn't resist the invitation in the tilt of her voice, like a battered traveler offered a warm fireside seat. The next morning arrived with clear skies and a slight crispness that signaled summer's gentle goodbye. Clara and Gabrielle found themselves steered by fate or simple curiosity into conversation once again. He leaned on the bar, reading from a pink slip of paper pinned near the espresso machine, a short poem scrawled by a local high school student about the maple tree out back. Clara read over his shoulder, discovering new meaning in the ordinary words. They exchanged smiles as they recognized a universal truth, the power of poetry to unite hearts. Before opening for the day, Gabriel offered to help restock the shelves and admired newly released titles, occasionally finding hidden gems that piqued his interest. In return, Clara brewed him a special caramel latte to thank him for his labor and for some intangible sense of camaraderie he kindled in her. In one box of used books, Gabriel stumbled on an anthology of 19th century sonnets. Its cover faded but carefully preserved by the store's previous owner. The corners were worn, the spine cracked from years of love and exploration. Inside, the passages of time whispered from every yellowed page. Enthralled, he handed it quietly to Clara. She recognized it from her grandmother's cherished collection. "I thought this was lost," she breathed. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened the cover and saw her grandmother's flowery script in the margins, decorating each sonnet with her thoughts, snatches of her own life, joys and heartbreaks. Gabriel, as if sensing that he had stumbled onto a precious artifact from Clara's past, stepped back respectfully, letting her savor the rediscovery. She gently placed the anthology on the main reading table, eager to revisit it later. In her chest, a gentle warmth glowed, a gratitude that this wandering poet, a stranger less than 24 hours before, had helped bring back a piece of her heritage. As the day progressed, a soft bustle crept into the bookstore cafe. Regulars filtered in for their routine orders, greeting Clara and nodding politely at Gabriel, who was already beginning to feel at home there. In between cappuccino orders and pastry pickups, Clara snuck glances at him, observing how he responded to each newcomer, gentle, curious, never overstepping. She found in him a calm sincerity that resonated with her own quietly beating heart. On the far side of the cafe, a young woman named Evie, an art student, was trying to match paint swatches to the glow of the overhead lamps. Meanwhile, Mr. Colton, a retired professor of literature, perused the shelves in search of a new translation of Dante's Inferno. Each customer shaped the daily tapestry of the cafe, and Gabriel seemed to slip seamlessly into that pattern. When asked where he came from, he simply shared enchanting fragments: a dazzling desert sunrise, a night of stargazing in a remote field, a spontaneous poetry recital by an ocean pier. He had lived fully, it seemed, in moments unbound by routine. That evening, Clara decided it was time to test out an idea forming in the back of her mind. "We have a small stage," she said, carefully reorganizing a display of poetry chapbooks at the counter. "Usually we reserve it for monthly open mic nights, poetry, acoustic guitar sets, Sometimes dramatized readings, but I'd love to hear one of your poems, if you're willing. Gabriel paused, measuring the invitation. I rarely have an audience outside of the open mics on the road, he admitted in a subdued tone. But I think I'd like that. He looked around at the evening's sparse crowd and nodded, as though gathering courage for the performance. When the cafe had settled into its twilight hush, Clara lowered the house lights slightly, leaving the string of fairy bulbs over the stage glowing softly. Gabriel approached the small podium, his weathered notebook in hand, and after a moment's hesitation, he began to read. His voice, a gentle baritone, wove images of open highways and star-soaked skies across which hope and longing soared. Clara noticed a hush fall over the few patrons who remained. Even the clattering cups from the back sink seemed to silence themselves. The words washed over her with a sweet ache, each line calling forth the yearning she felt to see the wider world and to anchor herself in a loving place all at once. When Gabriel finished, a quiet applause resonated from those assembled. His cheeks flushed with modesty, but he beamed with satisfaction. Clara met his eyes from behind the counter, her heart fluttering with an admiration she was unprepared to name. Never had she witnessed words so perfectly capture the spirit of wandering that lived within him. She found herself, equally, longing to discover more of his world while sharing the sanctity of her own. As the crisp autumn days marched on, Gabriel lingered in the small town far longer than he had originally planned. One day became another, then a week, and more. The bookstore Café turned into a sanctuary for him. It was no longer just a pit stop, but something akin to a portal between his poetic wanderings and the possibility of a more grounded, flourishing existence. Each morning, he and Clara shared in the ceremony of preparing coffee beans for the day, grinding, weighing, testing the water temperature, ensuring the perfect brew. The mundane details turned into a daily refrain they performed together. And when moments of stillness found them between the waves of customers, they exchanged lines of poetry, hers shy but sincere, and his bold from years of practice and revision. One late afternoon, while shelving new arrivals, Gabriel looked up from a hardcover travel journal depicting the vivid landscapes of the African savanna. He spotted Clara perched on a ladder, carefully placing a row of classic romances in alphabetical order. Something about the soft curve of her chin and the furrow of her brow made him acutely aware of her presence, like the mesmerizing hush before a secret is told. He found it both spellbinding and terrifying, realizing that the lines he had written about ephemeral moments of connection now took on new weight. Clara was no longer just an observer in his verse. She was the verse itself, coming to life in front of him. Fearing he might lose his balance on the wave of these emotions, he retreated to his favorite table. There he scribbled a few lines of heartbreak and promise, of fluttering leaves in the hush after thunder. Across the cafe, Clara glanced his way, noticing the set of his shoulders as he bent over his page. Awareness tingled between them, bridging the silence. Another week passed, and a Thursday night arrived, quiet and mellow. It was near closing time when Clara thought of a whimsical notion. She dimmed the primary lights, leaving only the ambient glow from the recessed bulbs. From behind the counter, she unearthed an old record player, a relic from her grandmother's era, which she carefully coaxed back to life. Soft classical music, interlaced with gentle static pops, filled the kitchen and spread across the aisles of sleeping books. The comforting hush of pages seemed to listen reverently. Ever curious, Gabriel stepped out from behind a bookshelf, intrigued by the melody. "Where did you hide that?" he asked in mock disbelief, a slight grin curving his mouth. "In the back room, collecting dust," Clara replied, her gaze turning playful. "I only bring it out for special nights." Gabriel caught the invitation in her voice. He set down his notebook, extended a tentative hand, and asked softly, "May I have this dance?" It was a gesture both old-fashioned and endearing. She hesitated a moment, heart thudding. Then, with an exhale, she placed her hand in his. The gentle waltz playing over the scratches of the record guided them across the wooden floor, shifting them between the tall shelves and the quiet tables littered with coffee cups and poetry chapbooks. The moment felt suspended in time, and Clara realized that every choice they had made, he to linger here, she to stay open late, led them to share this dance. She laughed quietly as she nearly tripped over the folded edge of a rug. He steadied her, and they locked eyes, cheeks warming under the subtle glow. For the brief moments of the song, speech felt unnecessary. In the hush that followed, their breathing slowed, and they eased back from each other as though releasing a fragile dream into the night. The next day, with an early evening sun setting the sky afire in orange and purple, Clara was tidying up when she overheard a snippet of conversation from Gabriel. He stood near the entrance on his cell phone, voice subdued. The scraps she caught, an invitation, an event in another town, a lingering sense of duty made her breath hitch. She knew his life was a rolling canvas of movement, ephemeral as footprints on a sandy shore. The knowledge settled in her chest like a heavy stone. She realized how deeply she had come to rely on his presence to brighten each day, as though he were proof that the intangible could become real if only one believed fervently enough in the power of art and companionship. Wanting to grant him space, she busied herself by refilling sugar jars. A swirl of confusion and heartache welled up inside her, threatening the carefully balanced calm she nurtured each morning with her coffee routine. Of course he wasn't meant to stay. It would be unfair to blame him for continuing his journey. She repeated those thoughts to herself like a litany, trying to remain rational. But the heart rarely yields to logic. Sure enough, that evening, Gabriel finally spoke of his departure. "Clara," he began gently, catching her right after she had closed the door to a customer. There's an event in a nearby city. They want me to do a reading. I've delayed too many other invitations already." A hint of regret darkened his eyes, yet also a steely resolve. He was, after all, a traveler by nature. She managed a soft smile, though her voice quavered. "This is wonderful. You should share your art with as many people as possible. That's what makes it alive, right?" They stood silently alongside the front counter, the same place where they had first exchanged polite words weeks ago. Now a hush of mutual understanding passed. This was the moment they both sensed the end of a cherished chapter. He took her hand in his, giving it a slight squeeze. She closed her eyes briefly, memorizing the warmth radiating from his fingers. "I'll be gone in a couple of days," he said. I'd like to do one last reading here before I go." Clara nodded, swallowing the sting of tears. "Of course," she whispered. "Let's make it special." Word spreads quickly in a small town, especially when a beloved local spot hosts a special event. By the following night, a small but appreciative crowd gathered in the bookstore Café. Handmade posters announced a farewell poetry reading, with Gabriel's name scrawled in Clara's curling script. Friends, regular customers, curious passers-by. Everyone assembled with eager anticipation. Clara had arranged comfortable seating, plush cushions on the floor around the low stage, and scattered candles whose flames wavered in the gentle evening breeze. The reading began with a hush. Gabriel took the stage, wearing the same worn coat from weeks ago, but something about him had changed. Confidence radiated in his stance, and there was a subdued glow in his expression. He performed pieces that had traveled with him across the country, poems about midnight trains, solitary motels, and strangers encountered at bus stations. His words held an awareness that each farewell, every parting, carved the shape of the person one was becoming. Then, with a quiet smile, he introduced a new piece, titled Coffee Steam and Kindred Souls. In it, he wove images of a humble shop, the swirl of brown liquid pouring gently into porcelain cups, and a radiant spirit who matched him line for line, heartbeat for heartbeat. Clara stood behind the counter, eyes shining with pride and sorrow. She recognized pieces of her routine in the images he painted: the hiss of the machine, the gentle rustle of pages, the sweet hush of a shared moment. The final lines of his poem spoke of the subtle transformations that blossom when two people share not just words, but also the stillness between them. Applause erupted, and for a moment, the cafe felt weightless, its walls resonating with the echo of a promise that something beautiful had been crafted here, intangible yet real. When the last of the audience departed, carrying the glow of the reading out into the night, Gabriel was left standing near the stage, gazing at the half-cleared chairs. Clara joined him slowly, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. They drank in silence for several moments, letting the echoes of his poetry linger. An unspoken question hovered in the air. Would she ask him to stay? Would he say no? She found her lips parted before her mind was consciously ready. "I have something for you," she said, leading him over to a bookshelf near the back. She swung aside an old ladder to reveal the vintage anthology of 19th century sonnets they had found together. With gentle reverence, she took it and pressed it into his hands. "My grandmother would have wanted someone who truly understands poetry to keep this safe," she said. "I have learned each line by heart, but there's no one else I'd trust to carry it into the world." His eyes widened, and he looked down at the aged cover. "I can't possibly. This is your family's, your inheritance." She shook her head with a resolve that still trembled. "Some heirlooms are meant for traveling. You breathe life into words, and perhaps you'll find someone else, somewhere else, who needs these sonnets as much as I did." She gave a watery laugh. "Just bring them back someday, if your road leads you here again." He gathered her in a gentle embrace, their coffee mugs forgotten on a nearby chair. For a moment, head resting on his shoulder, Clara experienced each measure of time as if it were a stanza in a poem suspended between them. His heart thrummed an unspoken lullaby, and she found warmth in the steady rise and fall of his breath against hers. The night before he left, they stayed up well past midnight, sipping tea that Clara had brewed after the cafe was officially closed. A hush enveloped them, broken only by the occasional crack of a shifting floorboard or the rumble of a passing car outside. Gazing across the table, they recited lines of poetry, slowly, letting each syllable take root. They made no promises of forever, recognizing that their bond was infinitely precious, precisely because it was fragile. Yet, in that recognition, a quiet yearning for a future meeting blossomed, a hope that circled them like the sweet smell of night-blooming jasmine. Eventually, dawn's faint fingertips pressed against the horizon. Exhausted but reluctant to say goodbye, they parted with brittle smiles. He would be packing in a few hours, needing to catch the morning bus out of town. She, in turn, would open the cafe, valiantly attempting to slip back into her usual routine. The next morning, she woke early, feeling the absence of his presence even before she opened her eyes. She busied herself preparing the cafe, methodically measuring out beans, grinding them, setting the pastries in the display case. Each task felt unnervingly hollow. By 9 o'clock, she'd served 3 customers, each in a hurry, not lingering long. And in the lulls, Clara found herself glancing at the door, waiting for the tinkling bell, knowing it would not herald Gabrielle's arrival this time. But at 9:30, as a slender beam of sunlight warmed the cafe floor, the bell did ring. She straightened, breath quickening, only to find a vaguely familiar postal carrier stepping inside. He was holding a small envelope. "Delivery for Clara," he said. She thanked him quietly, hands shaking as she accepted the letter. Carefully slicing it open, She pulled out a single, folded sheet of paper. The script was Gabriel's, scrawled in calm, deliberate lines. Where the coffee meets the page, I leave a piece of me. Your kindness put ink in my pen, your laughter shaped my words, and your warmth gave me a place to call home, if only for a time. Here, on this piece of paper, is the address of the venue where I'm performing. No promises, just an invitation. Should you ever find yourself wandering, know that my heart remains open, like a well worn book, awaiting the next chapter. Gabriel, at the bottom, he had jotted down a mailing address and a short list of upcoming cities on his itinerary. Clara read the note twice, and a quiet emotion took hold. Hope, tinted by an acceptance that life was a weaving of paths, some crossing multiple times, some diverging for good. She tucked the note in her apron pocket, letting relief flood her. He had left the door ajar to possibility, no longer a closed farewell. For the rest of that day, and in the weeks that followed, Clara discovered that even in his absence, Gabriel's presence lingered in every corner of the bookstore cafe. His lines of poetry were taped to the walls or scrawled on scraps of paper, stuffed like hidden treasures between pages of old anthologies. The record player found its place near the corner stage, a new fixture reminding her of that one magical dance. And the staff and customers who had attended his readings continued to talk about him, gently wondering if he'd return. Clara pressed forward, fulfilling her routines and reinvesting her heart in the cafe she had always loved. Yet, now each cappuccino, each arrangement of pastries, each quiet conversation with a curious stranger carried new meaning, a glimmer that love and art could spark in the most ordinary moments. Time moved on and seasons shifted, but the memory of a traveling poet remained like a treasured bookmark. Sometimes, late at night, she would lock up and stand by the big bay window, the reflection of the street lamp dancing across her face. She'd picture a dusty road winding toward the unknown. She wondered where Gabriel was, whether he was safe, and whether he was thinking of the small bookstore cafe that had offered him a momentary refuge. She suspected that someday, when the verses in his notebook pulsed with fresh longing and he sought the comfort of familiar ground, he might find his way back. And until then, Clara needed no promise. She had an address scrawled on a folded letter, she had a book of sonnets traveling with him, and she had the quiet swirl of coffee aroma greeting her each sunrise. All pointed to the enduring truth that, whenever two souls meet over a shared love of words, no distance or passing of time can wholly extinguish that spark. In this knowledge, she found both calm and anticipation, letting her heart rest in the cozy hush of the bookstore cafe, always ready for the next stanza life would offer.